On May 4th, 2024, first responders rushed into a home in Chester County, Pennsylvania, and found a 12-year-old girl unconscious, covered in injuries, weighing only 50 pounds. Her father claimed it was a bicycle accident, but when investigators looked closer, they found hundreds of videos recorded by the family's own security cameras, showing something far more horrifying. Malinda Hoagland was 12 years old. She loved unicorns. She loved going to Wawa with her older sisters. She was the kind of kid who wrote thank you notes to school lunch ladies for stocking her favorite applesauce. She was also a straight-A student. Around 2020, Malinda moved to West Caln Township in Chester County with her father, Malinda Hoagland. Her mother was seriously ill and couldn't care for her, so Rendell took custody. He wasn't raising her alone, though. His longtime girlfriend, Cindy Warren, lived with them. She became Malinda's day-to-day caregiver. On the surface, it looked normal. A suburban home, a quiet neighborhood, a father trying his best. But Cindy Warren had a secret. Years earlier in Monroe County, she'd been convicted of child endangerment. She'd served 3 to 7 years in prison for abusing her own 3-year-old son. In that same case, her ex-husband had killed a 2-year-old girl. There were court orders in place, restrictions. She wasn't supposed to have prolonged, unsupervised contact with children. And yet, here she was, living with Malinda full-time. At school, Malinda seemed fine. She had friends. She participated in class. Teachers described her as bright, engaged, kind. But by late 2023, something started to shift. Malinda began missing school. A lot. Teachers noticed she looked thinner, tired. They raised concerns with Chester County children, youth, and families. Then in December 2023, Malinda stopped coming to school altogether. Her father withdrew her. He said he'd be homeschooling her, enrolling her in a cyber charter program instead. And just like that, Malinda disappeared from public view. No one saw her in person anymore. No teachers, no counselors, no friends. She was alone in that house, and the cameras were watching. For months, Malinda attended school online from home. Her teachers couldn't see much through the screen, but they noticed something remarkable. She was still excelling. In March 2024, just weeks before her death, she was named Student of the Month. She smiled on Zoom. She turned in perfect assignments. She seemed fine. But inside that house, a different reality was unfolding. Malinda Hoagland and Cindy Warren had installed security cameras throughout the home. Blink cameras, the kind you control from your phone. They could watch Malinda from anywhere. They could speak to her through the camera speakers, even when they weren't in the room. And they recorded everything. What those cameras captured, hundreds of videos, hundreds of images, would later become the backbone of the prosecution's case. Malinda was being punished constantly, for small things, for nothing at all. She forgot a chore, punishment. She didn't smile enough on a Zoom call, punishment. She wet herself while restrained, punishment. The punishments were brutal. She was forced to exercise for hours, running in place, doing squats, while shackled to furniture. Sometimes her ankles were cuffed. Sometimes she was chained. The refrigerator was locked. Food was withheld. She was starving. Text messages between Rendell and Cindy show them coordinating these punishments, mocking her, laughing. Prosecutors would later say Malinda had been reprogrammed, taught to accept abuse as normal, taught to stay silent. And she did. Even as her body broke down, she said nothing. By early May 2024, Malinda was in critical condition. She had multiple broken bones, bruises everywhere, pressure sores, organ failure. She weighed 50 pounds. On the evening of May 4th, Malinda Hoagland finally called 911. "My daughter's unconscious," he said. He told the operator she'd been riding her bike. She hit a tree, maybe a waterslide accident at a campground. The story kept changing. When paramedics arrived at the home on Reed Road, they found Malinda barely alive, emaciated, broken, covered in injuries that clearly didn't come from a bike crash. They rushed her to Paoli Hospital. Doctors and nurses worked desperately to save her. but her body had endured too much. At 9:58 p.m. during surgery, Malinda Hoagland was pronounced dead. She was 12 years old. The moment medical staff saw Malinda's body, they knew something was terribly wrong. This wasn't an accident. Her injuries were extensive, severe, and they told a story, one that had nothing to do with a bicycle. Police immediately launched an investigation. West Caln Township officers, Chester County detectives, and Pennsylvania State Police converged on the home. They secured the scene, they interviewed Rendell and Cindy, and they started looking at the evidence. The autopsy came back quickly. The forensic pathologist's conclusion was devastating. Malinda had died from starvation and blunt force trauma. Not a single fall, not a freak accident. Long-term starvation, repeated beatings, organ failure caused by months, maybe years of abuse. Her body showed more than 70 separate injuries. Broken bones, deep bruising, cuts, ulcers, damage to nearly every major organ, including her brain. She weighed 50 pounds when she died. A 12-year-old girl. Rendell's story didn't match. He'd claimed she hit a tree while riding her bike, but investigators asked, if that were true, why were there so many old injuries? Why was she so severely malnourished? Why did the hospital staff describe her as emaciated beyond recognition? The answers started coming when detectives obtained search warrants for the family's phones and home security system. What they found was staggering. Hundreds of videos, hundreds of images, all of it recorded by the couple's own cameras. The footage showed Malinda, day after day, week after week, being tortured. She was chained to furniture, ankle-cuffed, forced to exercise while restrained, sometimes for hours. Cindy and Rendell would yell at her through the camera speakers, belittle her, threaten her. In some videos, Cindy's younger son, who was not abused, was the one holding the camera. The videos were time-stamped, dated. Investigators could trace the abuse back to at least November 2021. That was more than 2 years before Malinda's death. 2.5 years of escalating torture. But here's the question that haunted the case. Why didn't anyone stop it? Malinda's school had reported concerns to Chester County children, youth, and families. Multiple times. Teachers saw the warning signs: absences, weight loss, exhaustion. CYF followed up, but only by phone. They called Rendell. He assured them everything was fine, and that was it. No home visit, no in-person check, no conversation with Malinda alone. And then she was pulled from school. Once she was enrolled in cyber school, she became even harder to reach. She was a face on a screen. Teachers could see her during class, but they couldn't see the chains. They couldn't see the locked refrigerator. They couldn't see what happened when the camera turned off. Investigators also uncovered something else, something that made the case even more disturbing. Cindy Warren's criminal history. She had a prior conviction for child endangerment. She'd been to prison, and there were custody orders specifically restricting her access to children. Yet she was allowed to live with Malinda, full-time, unsupervised. How did that happen? The records weren't shared across counties. When Rendell moved from Monroe County to Chester County, Cindy's past didn't follow her, at least not in a way that triggered red flags. The system had failed at every level. Detectives kept digging. They recovered text messages between Rendell and Cindy, some deleted, some not. The messages showed a disturbing pattern. They discussed Malinda's punishments in detail. They planned them. They joked about them. One message mocked her for stealing food from the locked fridge. Another discussed forcing her to exercise longer because she looked lazy. There was no remorse, no recognition that what they were doing was wrong. Prosecutors would later argue that this wasn't a case of discipline gone too far. This was torture, deliberate, sustained, calculated, and the evidence was overwhelming. On May 6, 2024, just 2 days after Malinda's death, Chester County detectives arrested Malinda Hoagland and Cindy Warren. They were both charged with attempted criminal homicide, aggravated assault, kidnapping, and related offenses. Bail was set at $1 million each, but the investigation wasn't over. As prosecutors reviewed more evidence, more videos, more texts, more medical records, They realized the charges didn't fully capture the horror of what had happened. This wasn't just abuse that led to death. This was murder. On July 24, 2024, the Chester County District Attorney's Office upgraded the charges. Rendell and Cindy were now charged with first-degree murder, second-degree murder, third-degree murder, kidnapping, involuntary servitude, and hundreds of related offenses. And the DA made another announcement. They would seek the death penalty for both defendants. The basis? Torture. Under Pennsylvania law, torture is an aggravating factor that can justify capital punishment. And in this case, prosecutors said the evidence of torture was undeniable. District Attorney Christopher de Barena-Sarobe held a press conference. His words were blunt. Malinda Hoagland endured evil and torment that no child should ever have to face, he said. She was reprogrammed to accept abuse as part of her life. He described the videos, the starvation, the isolation. This was not an accident, he said. This was murder. For months, Rendell Hoagland and Cindy Warren sat in jail awaiting trial. The case drew national attention. Media outlets across the country covered it. The details were too horrifying to ignore. A 12-year-old girl, tortured for years, in her own home. While the system looked the other way, Malinda's older sisters, Emily, Jamie, and Abby, became vocal advocates. They filed civil lawsuits against Chester County children, youth, and families, against the Coatesville Area School District, against anyone who had missed the signs. They wanted accountability. They wanted change. They began pushing for something they called Malinda's Law. The proposal included a statewide database of child abuse offenders, mandatory home visits when a child is suddenly withdrawn from school amid abuse concerns, stricter wellness checks for cyber school students. There's another Malinda out there today, one advocate said, and we have to find her before it's too late. Then, in January 2026, the case took a major turn. Rendell Hoagland accepted a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and conspiracy. In exchange, the death penalty was taken off the table. On January 15th, he stood before Judge Anne Marie Wheatcraft in Chester County Court. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus additional years. He will die in prison. During the hearing, Malinda's aunt, Christine Mehrhauser, gave a victim impact statement. She called the abuse calculated, sustained cruelty inflicted on an innocent child. The aunt's statement reportedly moved the judge to tears. Rendell was offered a chance to speak. He declined. No apology, no explanation, nothing. Cindy Warren, however, has pleaded not guilty. She is still awaiting trial. Prosecutors say they will continue to seek the death penalty against her. Her case is expected to go to trial later in 2026. Malinda's sisters say they visit her grave now instead of taking her to the movies. They say they think about her every day, about what she endured, about what could have been done differently. The community of West Caln Township is still reeling. Teachers are still grieving. Investigators are still haunted by the videos they had to watch. And across Pennsylvania, lawmakers are still debating how to prevent the next Malinda. Because the truth is, this case didn't have to end the way it did. There were warning signs, there were reports, there were chances to intervene, but the system didn't work. The gaps were too wide, the follow-through too weak. Malinda Hoagland was a straight-A student who loved unicorns and wrote thank you notes to lunch ladies. She deserved so much more than what she got. She deserved to be seen, to be heard, to be saved. What do you think could have been done differently? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, consider subscribing, because cases like these matter and they need to be told.